First Contact isn't just about meeting aliens. It's about becoming the kind of people who are ready to meet them. It's a story of facing a traumatic past, overcoming self-doubt and selfishness while everyone else is fanboying, and stepping into an unknown future where the seduction of power threatens the bonds of loyalty. In today's live stream, we will break down how Star Trek First Contact poses a powerful question about who we are all choosing to become. Let's start the show. Hello and welcome to the Savage Stream, the weekly live stream where we talk all things Star Trek. And today we are talking about my favorite, I think easily my favorite Star Trek movie, First Contact. And I'm super excited to be joined today by my friend, BRYAN, who is the co-host of the Trek, Marry, Kill podcast. Now, let me tell you about this podcast. I actually wrote it down so I wouldn't forget. On this podcast, BRYAN and his co-host, Kristen, and the occasional special guest who you may recognize, rate Star Trek episodes on everything from great lines to best Trek tropes to most cosplayable moment and more. And these grades culminate in a final judgment of whether the episode deserves a Trek, a marry, or a kill. BRYAN, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Charisse. Great to be here.
Yeah, I am super excited to have you on today. BRYAN and I did a bunch of episodes of Trek, Marry, Kill, and it just, I don't know, we did it for so long that now that we're not doing it, it just feels weird. But it was really fun because BRYAN is the reason why I watched season 5 of Discovery. So yay for that.
Yeah, you're really a co-host of the show. I mean, at some point I was just like, it's great. It was great having you on.
Yeah, it was super fun. Okay, so today we're going to talk about First Contact, which I love. I freaking love this movie. So I want to ask you, and also you who are watching live. Hello, everybody watching live. Hello on the replay. Let me know. Do you remember the first time you saw this movie?
I remember.
So that's for you,
crystal
BRYAN, and for
clear.
everyone in the chat. Okay,
Yeah.
tell me, what was it like?
I was 16 years old, and it was. I remember driving to school that day. Well, I was commuting. I was an hour from high school, and so I was reading the paper, and they used to have the poster in the newspaper, and I just stared at that poster with Picard and Data and the Borg, and I remember being very excited. I went with my friends right after school that day, and I was loaded up on soda and red vines, and I proceeded to watch in a packed theater the greatest Star Trek The Next Generation episode since, All Good Things, but also like one of the best ever. And it felt like they made an episode as a movie. And I remember being so excited afterwards that rather than just like go have more fun, I was like, I want to write a time travel story or something that's that cool. It inspired me to geek out more rather than like just enjoy the moment. But it was amazing. I loved it.
And for those of you who don't know this about BRYAN's background, he has a writing background. So that makes sense that you were like, just the artist in you was totally inspired by the majesty of this movie.
The whole time I was like, they did it. Jonathan Frakes directed a movie, and it looked like a movie, and it felt like a movie, and it was as exciting as anything I've seen to that point in my life. It was, it's great.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because the beauty of the movie is like, the artistry of the visuals, it very much looks like a movie. But if we think about the new Trek, every episode looks like that, right? Like every episode of Discovery, every episode of Strange New Worlds, you're like, this looks like a straight up movie. This is like 45 minutes long and it looks like a movie. Like the quality is outrageous, but for it having been made so long ago and it still looks really good, I think that's kind of impressive.
Absolutely. Yeah. Cinematic.
Some parts of the CGI is like, but I'll take it because like the part where the gas that comes out of the nacelles and like melts everything. Yeah. Like that's kind of like whatever. But when Picard picks up the Borg Queen's spine and then snaps it, that still looks cool. Like, and part of me is like, oh my gosh, he's breaking a prop. Like that's how I feel like my little DIY heart. Just like, I know they made
it was made to be broken though. So it was a perfectly used prop.
I know, but I'm just like that. It was so cool. And I thought about like the engineering and building it, and they probably built more than one, but for him to just snap it, I was like, can they put that back?
The shot of the Borg Queen being assembled in front of Data, I remember that being a very big deal. At the time, it was one of the most complex ILM shots that they had done to that point. I remember Industrial Light and Magic, the visual effects house that did it. And then I remember when Voyager basically recreated the shot, and it's like amazing that television can do the visual effects kind of on a feature scale, but it was also like they already did it and they did it well. But I think that was the point is like we get to see the Enterprise E for the first time. The first time we see the Enterprise E, it's
the first and last, right?
It looks no. It's the first. I think it's a model though. In the subsequent appearances, it's actually full CGI. But in any case, I'm not actually sure of that. But in any case, the first time we see it, it's presented to us like the painting of the Enterprise D in Picard's ready room. It's this beauty shot of the ship we've never seen before. And I just remember my friends and I, because we're all nerds, but everyone in the theater was like, oh, there she is, the Enterprise. So that was really cool. Seeing the bridge was whatever. I mean, the bridge was, it's okay.
It was cool. It was cool.
Seeing them in their uniforms, all that it was just really neat. And then you get into the time travel of it all. And it, there's goofy stuff in there with Zefram Cochran. I had actually never seen the companion episode, the original episode, with Zefram Cochran in it. So I had no frame of reference that Star Trek had already shown him. I've since seen the episode, and it's like, oh yeah, they definitely make a bit of a departure there.
Yeah, I don't know what episode you're talking about.
In the original series,
TOS. Okay.
In the original series, Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, and Commissioner Nancy Hedford, they find Zefram Cochran, who's been kept alive for like 100 years by this gaseous entity called the Companion, that's fallen in love with Zefram Cochran because he's like a hot space pilot. So it's not a bad episode. It's really good.
So wait, Zefram Cochran, that's how his story ends? Like he does contact and meets the Vulcans and then gets like enveloped by some gaseous alien that falls in love with him.
Then he just kind of like takes off, like maybe like a cat that goes off to die by himself. But like he goes off, and then instead of just dying peacefully, he encounters this gaseous entity that winds up keeping him alive and then falling in love with him. So
what happens at the end of that though? What happens
at the end of that one? Once he finds out that the companion, that this alien that's been sustaining him, actually loves him, like is in love with him. It's actually a little gross. So Nancy Hedford is conveniently in the script a woman who has been brought along on this adventure, and she's fallen ill, and that's why they have her in a shuttlecraft. They're trying to race to get her medical attention, but they don't make it in time, and they make sure to write a note that she and the alien kind of have a conversation, and rather than die, she gives her body to this alien vessel, this alien entity, so then she takes over its body and then can fall in love with the man. They make it very clear to constantly call him the man must continue. So it's kind of oogie, but it's also kind of interesting. And I don't know, as an ending for the Zefram Cochran we see in Star Trek First Contact, probably kind of fitting.
Yeah, it's perfectly fitting, actually. You're absolutely right. So maybe some writer in the back of the room had that in mind and was like, let's give this guy a little bit of that, like Johnny Depp thing. So that way, if something, it matches with the weirdness.
He's not someone to take seriously. His life ends with him falling in love with gas. So like, let's.
Yeah, that's super weird. So good to know though, because I had no idea. I know he does show up, because his actor's in everything.
Yes. He had also been in TNG.
He was in TNG in is it Higher Ground? No, he was that was I think that might have been that was the kidnap episode. Whatever. He was in the episode
Hunted
with the Jason
or the
Bourne
Wounded,
guy.
not the Wounded, the Hunted.
It was the Hunted. It was the Hunted.
Yes.
Yeah, he was like the mayor of the planet.
The administrator. Yeah, the little wormy
the
manager guy. Yeah.
The president of the world.
Yes.
When like all the Jason Bournes got free and wanted their freedom from prison. And then he was like, and then Picard was like, you all have to learn to work together. Peace.
That's right.
And then they just had to figure that out. We don't know what happened next.
That was when Roga Dana rinsed the security crew of the Enterprise. He outsmarted all of them for half the episode.
Outgunned. This is where we learn that if you have enough mental fortitude, you can just break through a transporter beam and transport yourself somewhere else on the ship. We did not know that before Roga Danar, when he was just like, and then shows up on like deck 12.
It
What?
contains multitudes. Yeah.
So great. I actually love that episode too. Okay, so Nadia says, I don't remember the first time, but I never saw any Star Trek movies in the theaters except for Nemesis. Oh, what
Oh
a bummer.
no,
That was
yeah.
the one you saw. What a bummer.
That's a
And then
bummer.
the later reboots of the TOS crew, which is probably like the Chris Pine ones,
Yeah.
which were good. Like those were beautiful, of course. Like they, you know,
Yeah,
they
talk
did
about
their own thing.
cinematic for sure. Yes.
Talk about cinematic. The scene where they jump
Mhm.
through the ship. Remember we saw that again in Discovery? We were like, oh, they're doing this again.
Mhm.
So cool. Like I'm not mad at that. It's very cool. But First Contact is great. I was literally just watching it before I joined the live stream. Same. No, actually, I was gonna skim through it before this live stream just to refresh my memory. But then I was like, last night I was like, oh, let me skim through it the night before so I can be super prepared. There was no skimming. From the very first opening scene, when it zooms out of Picard's eye and he's in the Borg cube, I was like, I mean,
Yeah.
I was totally in. The only thing that I skipped was everything with Zephyr and Cochran because not because it's bad. Like in my mind, it's bad and it's slow and it's boring. In reality, it's not. It's just I was so fixated on what was happening on the ship that every time
Yeah,
they
I
went back,
mean, this
I was
stream's
like,
gonna be about all that stuff. The stream's gonna have the Zephyr Cochran stuff's gonna lend a lot to our theme here tonight, I think. About
yes,
just
yes,
I'm with you on First Contact. So for me, Generations, which was, Next Generation crew was the crew that I fell in love with, obviously. I think I've said on the podcast. Deep Space Nine crew, though, that's the one where it's like, so TNG was my biological family and DS9 was my friend's family. Like, that's my chosen crew. Like, I had no choice. And then like TOS is like, they're the greatest generation. They're the grandparents who made it all possible, kind of thing. So I
yeah.
have
They're the
respect and they're
grandparents who are in
amazing.
the other. They're in the house when you're outside with all the kids.
That's right.
So
And they're the
you know what
ones,
they are.
yeah, and
Mhm.
they're the ones that when the TNG gets a little too strict, they're like, oh, come on, let them have some fun. You're being too hard. We didn't do that when we were kids. We didn't do that to you. That kind of stuff.
We cranked right
Absolutely.
out the
Yeah,
fire
yeah.
hose.
But Generations, as much as, it was great seeing Star Trek Next Generation on the big screen, Generations is a traumatic movie for me, who was 13 at the time, of like, oh, the Enterprise is destroyed and Kirk dies. Is too much. But that movie is also very boring in a lot of parts. And so that is a movie that I will put on when I absolutely need to fall asleep. In high school and college, when I needed to take a nap before when I was in theater and it was like before a tech rehearsal or something, I'm like, I need to put on Generations. I'm out. But First Contact, if I try to do that, even if I'm like working, I'm with you. I'm watching it all the way
Yeah.
through. I've seen that
It's
movie so many
distracting. It's
times. They
distractingly
put it in
good.
when they put it on high def on streaming, because I wasn't going to spend the money to buy the box set of 3 movies I don't want to watch. But so just for First Contact, and I don't want to spend $25 just on First Contact. No offense, I've bought that movie many times. So, but it's on streaming and in 4K, and I'm just like, I'm gonna watch this in 4K and see how it looks. And I'm suddenly in high school again on that night I mentioned. So,
Yeah, it's really cool. Like I don't remember how I felt when I first saw it. The only memory I have is when the Borg Queen gets assembled. That is the only memory I have, and some vague thing about Data something something. But that scene when the Borg Queen does that, I just remember being like, I mean, it was the same. It was the same sense of like awe as in the scene in the Matrix when they start shooting and they start like
sure,
back,
yeah,
and like the bullets, and you're just like, what? And your mind is freaking blown, and you're like, how is this possible? It was that same level of awe that I recall, just being like, it's something I'd never conceived of. This person in 2 halves just gets like assembled and then just walks towards you. Like I do this every day. Like it just
yep,
was something I had never conceived of. It was so cool. And then you're like, wait, there's a queen? Wait, she's really like seductive? Wait, I mean, like everything you understood about the Borg, which wasn't much because there wasn't much to them, was like flipped upside down and mixed up. And
yeah,
especially the way when she shows up to talk to Data, her first words are, I am Borg. And you're like, what? I mean, everything about it is just, it's the definition of pattern interrupt, right? It's like,
absolutely.
like it brings your full attention. And she is such a magnetic character and so charismatic and like super evil, but she doesn't seem that evil, you know?
It's
She
that
seems like she
soft
really wants what's best for
voice.
you.
Yes, she has a very soft voice. Yeah, I mean, I say this sometimes. I mean, obviously life experiences, but a lot of movie experiences that are meaningful to me, I call them pristine memories. So I have a pristine memory of watching First Contact in the theater for the first time that whole day. Like Inglourious Basterds is another one. I've only seen that movie twice. The first time because I remember it start to finish in perfect detail. The second time I watched it was during lockdown, where we were all like, "Are we all gonna die?" So it's just like rewatches. And I remember very clearly. Yeah, I remember watching Inglourious Basterds in the rewatch. It was only the second time I've seen it. Going like, I remember every moment of this movie, and it's the same with First Contact, where it's like I remember the first time I watched every scene of this movie, every moment, and all that kind of over the years has done. Like, for example, I'm with you on those Zephyr and Cochran scenes. Those seem like easily skippable ones. But what I found over the years is the little things that hook you in. You know, there is something different in each one. I mean, if for no other reason, we get Barkley in one of them. You know, we get like little things in there in those scenes that matter.
I feel like Cochran is very intentional. Like those scenes are very intentional because they happen right after moments of high intensity.
Yes.
So it's like we need to catch our breath. We can't have this entire movie be shooting in the hallways with the Borg. Like we need just like some levity, some lightness. I mean, I love the scene. I actually did watch the Barkley scene is hilarious, but there's another scene after that where Cochran's like, I need to go take a leak. And then he just tries to run away. And so then they all chase him and then he runs some more and then Riker just shoots him because he's like, we don't have time to be chased, and just like blasts him. He like goes flying. I mean, it's hilarious. Like we need.
And he jumps a little too early. They didn't time the phaser blast right, and they never fixed it. I don't know why they never
and then
fixed that.
So. Supposedly gets hit in the shoulder, but he flies like this way for some reason, and then like rolls. So I don't know what was going on with the physics of that phaser hit, but it's perfectly timed because I think the scene right before that is like the one when Picard is machine gunning down one of his crewmen, right, and like opening his heart, and then it like goes to Zephyr and Cochran's running and like gets shot. There's something about that really makes the pacing so nice. Right. And it like calms the nervous system. So you're like, okay, let me take a moment. Let me look at this. And then once you're like kind of calm, then it goes back to the ship. So I think they're very intentional about when they take those pauses. And that's the point of the movie, right? Like the point of the movie is to get this ship launched. So really, like that's the point. But it's just not that interesting.
It is interesting. Well, I think you're absolutely right. But that's why this is such a great movie, is that every scene matters a lot. Like every scene, and it's to your point, you can't have every scene be a gun battle, be a screaming match. So you do have the comedy, but the comedy is balancing something else out. And I do want to mention this because, I mean, we haven't mentioned her yet. But Lily, Alfre Woodard, I mean, talk about pristine memory. That is such an amazing character, an amazing performance. It shouldn't. Well, so I guess it would have been hard for that not to work. But the fact that she's so amazing, it just bang. It's just immediate. It's a permanent mark in Star Trek history. It's so great. She is really both the audience surrogate for non-Star Trek fans, but she makes the story work as someone that kind of has to be taught what Star Trek's all about. She never really budges, though. That's what's so great about her, is like, she's like, I'm just trying to survive this. I'm not like trying to understand it enough to accept it. But she kind of just gets exposed to it, and that's enough, and that's great. Whereas, Zephyr Cochran's the one they actually need to convince. Right. So he's not seeing this future. Like,
yeah, but it's like there is no Cochran without Lily.
Yes.
And Lily's the number one. Lily's the first officer of whatever is going on in Cochran's world. And you're right. She is the audience. She is us. And she's the one calling Picard on his crap when no one else will, because he's the captain and his word goes. And if he says stand and fight, we stand and fight. And Lily's like, that's stupid. I'm not doing that. Get me out of here.
It's the greatest scene in the movie. It's the greatest scene in all 4 of the Next Generation movies. There are very few scenes in the J.J. Abrams movies, I think, comes close to that scene. The line must be drawn. Yeah, we put it in our show. It's like it just branded into your brain. It's so Jean-Luc Picard. It's like, and who is she? And it's like, she fits perfectly. It's what you said. She makes story sense. She's the only one who could do that. And obviously just, there's always an issue when you get TV actors jumping in a film. Some can make the leap more than others. This is not an insult but I think by that time, the people writing the Next Generation movies had written those characters so much that they don't give, Gates McFadden has talked about this, and it's true. What does Dr. Crusher get to do in those movies? What more could they do with Worf in that role? everyone's kind of playing caricatures of themselves a little bit.
For some reason, Troy is like, she's like Houston Control for some reason. I was like,
that's right. Somehow,
like, down 9, 8. I was like,
well, you know, she can't. She took the command training,
so she can count. Y'all didn't have anybody to count this down before. No one else could count. Okay, well, I mean, I'm glad she's here, but I just thought that was so random. By the way, everyone in the chat, I'm coming to your chats because I see them all, so we're coming to that.
Well, just basically,
right. They didn't have much to do.
Getting someone of Alfre Woodard's, excuse me, getting her someone of her performance ability, her stature. To me, she's like, I'm like, isn't she one of the greatest living actors that we have? And it's amazing to see, like, yeah, people like her, she's fine, but it's like she's so good in the movie that it's just like you needed that the movie kind of doesn't work without her. James Cromwell is like, that's a guy who is going to elevate anything you give him, but like we can all admit the Cochran part in that is not the strongest part of the movie. But I also think it's to your point of, yeah, because we got a lot of serious stuff happening on the ship with disfigurations and goo and trauma. We need a little levity down here, and he can play it both pretty well.
His freaking mind. Yeah. I mean, the scene of seeing crew members in uniform and half augmented, like looking and then turning around and just seeing the Borg walk them to their doom. It's just like, oh, I don't know. Like those scenes are very emotionally intense.
I mean,
right?
Don't let them touch you. You know, this is a warning we've never heard before, but now the Borg just have to touch you and you can become a Borg. But then also we get to see Worf finally being Worf. They're not telling him to, no. Worf's like, I suggest we kill them. And they're not saying no. And just the part where he goes, they've adapted, and he immediately takes his phaser and he starts hammering them.
Oh my gosh,
this is the stuff where it's like, we never got to see this in the show. And it's just,
this is what I love about Worf. He does this a couple times where he's like, pew, pew, they've adapted. Whack, and then he's like, pew pew, they've adapted, and I'm like, oh, he's gonna hand to hand in space, okay, and then he's like pulling off like a freaking knife or batleth or whatever he's carrying around with him with his spacesuit, which is not a good idea, but he's got some weapons on him, and I'm just like, and then the same thing with Data, right? Data's like, oh, it's not working, let me just break their neck and toss them in. Right. I mean, it's just like the action level is super high. Okay, so we've been geeking out all about this movie. I'm gonna go to your chats, and then I actually do have some things that I want to talk to Bryan about and talk to you all about. When it comes to this movie, because the big thing about the big overarching picture is what's going on with the Borg, but that's not really the deeper question, because if that's all it was, it would be a very uninteresting movie. The deeper question is really about choice. Who are we choosing to be? What futures are we creating? Hence the time travel in this movie. The Queen has a very solid agenda for what she's trying to create. Picard has a very solid agenda for who he's trying to be and who he's no longer trying to be, right? Data has a very solid agenda for who he's trying to be. And Cochran knows exactly what he wants, money. And now all of a sudden he's become some weird future celebrity, which you can imagine is probably pretty stressful. So I'm going to go through some of your comments and then we're going to jump in. Nadia says, I love how they can use CGI to make amazing battle scenes in Star Trek. It's so cool. Wingrace says we've got the Enterprise E and the tough little Defiant, right? Which I loved when Worf was like, little? Like, what do you call it? How dare you call my ship little? Because, you know, I didn't do the DS9 thing. And so I never got that in the movie. I never got why Worf was not on the Enterprise. Like, I never even thought about it.
All 5 of us Deep Space Nine fans were like...
I think everybody here is a Deep Space Nine fan.
But at the time, it was like... And, like, the Deep Space Nine producers are like, you can't trash the ship we just put in the show. And apparently they had a longer... Like, the rumors were like, Sisko's going to be in it, and he's going to give Worf the mission. I'm like, yes, we're going to see it! And then we didn't get that, and it was fine. But
maybe that would just be, like, one thing too many going on.
It was. Situation. It would have been... That's a Marvel thing that they definitely would have done today, but, like... I don't know. As a big Deep Space Nine head, I was like, I can't believe this is happening. And then they were like, the ship is still salvageable. I'm like, okay, well, at least I guess we'll see her next year then.
Yeah, exactly. At that part when they were like, when he was like, what about my ship? And they were like, oh, it's fine. It's just a drift, but it's fine. I was like, I see what you did there. Yes, Win Grace, we are having this conversation because First Contact Day is Saturday. Also, my mom's birthday. Her birthday is shared with First Contact Day. How fun is that? Thank you so much, PS2 Chipper. So good to see you here. Nadia says the introduction of the Borg Queen was awesome. Mr. Captain 93 says, my first thought of First Contact is the Borg part popping out of Picard's face in his dream right at the beginning. Yes, that was so creepy. They do that again in Voyager with 7 of 9, where she's like imagining that she's been reassimilated or something like that, and it's just as creepy. Like,
well, this is the thing about that movie. This movie was so great that Star Trek stripped it for parts over the ensuing years for images, motifs, musical things. Like it just, they pulled so much of it. Anytime the movies did something, the shows were like, great, we can use that. Dennis McCarthy recycled a lot of his score from Generations and in Deep Space Nine. Like it just, and so it was always fun seeing over the years. I'm like, okay, well, they did that in First Contact, and it's just like, we're only allowed to have like one great original idea every so often that we have to strip it for parts.
It was so good though. But then
that's the thing. It is great. Yes, it's true.
It is great. So one of the sections on Bryan and Kristen's podcast is best Trek tropes. And I almost wanted to do, I don't know if you guys have done this movie on your podcast, but I almost wanted to grade it because I was like, there's so many great tropes in here, like just regular. And then there's so many things, to your point, that have become tropes from here, right? Like people were just like, they were like, oh, we got to do that again. That can't be the only time we do that, you know? And you're like,
I think there's someone who mentioned that in the chat, like even as it extended all the way through Enterprise, and they're like, what if when they destroyed the Borg cube at the end of at the top of Act 2 in Star Trek First Contact, what if some of that wreckage was then in Enterprise? Right,
so
right.
They destroy the cube, the sphere comes out, and I think in Voyager they're all spheres. Like they were just like,
when they destroy the cube, there's an Enterprise episode, Regeneration, where they say the wreckage from that like is frozen in Antarctica, and some scientists thawed out, and now the Borg are alive in the pre-TOS era in Enterprise. So that's how they kind of weasel them into Enterprise.
I was wondering because somebody said they were like, oh, the Borg are in Enterprise. And I was like, oh, some of the drones must have like landed. And then when I was watching, I was like, oh no, they definitely blew it up.
Yeah.
Like they blew it up a lot.
They stripped this movie for parts, and you know, good for them. It's a great movie. So.
So
that's a Lower Decks. Yeah, the Lower Decks thing about the theme park, First Contact land for sure.
Nadia, nah, I like my biological and technological distinctiveness. I like keeping it to myself. PS2 Chipper says, if I was Borg, I wouldn't have felt as bad. That's hilarious. Okay, so best of Trek, worst of Trek. I'm not going to read this whole thing, but just to give you a shout out, has a live stream every Monday, and currently they are going through the 13 Star Trek movies. So it would have been perfect if First Contact kind of lined up with First Contact, but I think that's a couple movies down the road. But I just wanted to give a shout out to that. Yes, Lily is awesome in this. And how often do you see someone read Picard the Riot Act the way Lily does? I think we only see it one time when Riker tells him to shut up in that like made up land that the little alien boy made for him. So 0 times. Like 0 times do we see somebody talk back to Picard, because that would just be like such a shock, right?
Although in the Deep Space Nine pilot, Sisko kind of gives him the business.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. It's not like Lily Sloan level, but that's
absolutely not. Yeah,
right. He's like
the same. It's the same thing though, where no one's talked to Picard in that way. But in Sisko's case, he can't say "How dare you." He's like, "Oh, that." He's like, "Yeah, that's kind of a big deal." I think. I want to bring that because we did Defiant fairly recently, the episode where Thomas Riker poses as Will Riker on Deep Space Nine to steal the Defiant, and the episode, the first act, starts with him in Sisko's office. And Sisko's so happy to see him, but he's like, you tried to kill Picard. Everybody loves Riker. So I just love Sisko. I love Avery Brooks' performance. Is like, if I see Jean-Luc Picard, I'm going to shove that guy out of an airlock. If I see William Riker, I'm going to shake his hand.
I love how when he
tried to kill the guy who killed my wife. Thanks, man.
I love when he sees Q, he just punches him in the face. Like, yes, it's just so great. And Q's like, Picard never hit me. And he's like, I'm not Picard. And you're like, word. Yep. He's not. Yep. Okay, there's so many. Happy first contact day. There's so much more in the chat. You guys are killing it. You're going crazy. Okay, let me get the last couple on here, and then we'll go to some questions. To Borg from first contact incident. Exactly. So Brian was thankfully so they were talking about this in the chat. They were like, when did that happen in Enterprise? And so Mr. Captain 93 is filling in all the like backstory of that. Randall says, creating a rule that frozen Borg can be brought back to life. Yeah, there's like a few questions about that, because sometimes when the Borg are disconnected from the hive, they regain their individuality. Sometimes when they're disconnected from the hive, they starve to death. Sometimes when they're disconnected from the hive, they just get frozen and they're reactivated. But I feel like it should be like, go ahead.
No, but sometimes it's sweeps month, and you need the Borg to be in there for the ratings. So
Nadia says, if Leia can do it in Star Wars, I guess it's fair game for the Borg. Fair. Yeah,
are the Borg force sensitive? The greatest thread in the history of forums. Shut
Oh, by the way, I'm glad I wrote this note. If you are in the away team, those are the people in the membership for the channel. If you're on your computer, if you can go to the little like emoji section and then type in Borg and see if the little Borg emoji comes up, because I made a couple custom emoji just for people in the club, but I have no way to test them. So if you type in Borg and then hit enter, let me know if that actually works. Okay, so let's get into some of the people that I want to talk about. Their kind of, I want to say arc, but they don't all necessarily have an arc. So just their story in this movie. There's Picard, there's Cochran, there's Data, and there's the Borg Queen. So let's start with Picard. He is not a flawless captain here. Oh, bummer. It doesn't work. Okay, well, I'll figure out how to, I don't know what I did wrong. So I'll figure out how to fix it, because I definitely have those cute little emojis in there and I want you guys to be able to use them. So I will figure that out. Anyways, okay, so with Picard, this is really his first time addressing the trauma of what happened to him when he was assimilated. Now, he did go home at the end of Best of Both Worlds Part 2 in the episode Family to recover or something. Get grounded. I'm not really sure what the point of that episode was, but he did go home and take a break. He took a break, which we don't usually see in Star Trek. We usually see huge trauma and they go to work the next day. So he did take vacation, but he didn't really deal with what happened. And we get to see that play out in this whole movie, which I actually really love. And we didn't even need Troy. I guess this is where she could have come in handy. But we get to see him kind of just process how he felt, what that was like, having his individuality stripped and what he remembers and doesn't remember and all these things. And I really appreciate that. And what we get to see is him being like kind of petty, right? He's petty, he's vengeful. I think it's fair that anybody would feel the way he feels. But the reason why it's causing such a problem is because he's in charge. That's the last person you want to be petty and vengeful, because they have power to act on it in a way that could harm everyone else. And as we were saying, Lily calls him on his crap so that everybody on the whole ship doesn't die. So Brian, I want to ask you, what are your thoughts about this kind of change that we see in Picard? Were you satisfied with it? Do you think it needed more? Did it need less? What do you think?
Well, I think it had to be the way it was because it was a movie and you had to give it something dramatic to latch on to. And I think if you're telling that story, you have Patrick Stewart and he can, he did a Moby Dick TV movie, I believe, prior to this.
Did he?
Yes. And so I think they really just were like, let's transport that idea into this, because it doesn't really follow the Gene Roddenberry version of Star Trek, which in the original series, everyone great. And then his rich guy, post-middle age version of the 80s, Star Trek in the 80s was a little bit more like they don't really grieve. They don't have emotions. There's famously an episode where a kid's mom dies and he's like, we wouldn't do this because death is not really, people accept it and move on. I'm like, even a kid losing their mom? Anyway, so it was a little weird, but in terms of like seeing Picard being vengeful and angry, I think there was enough of it you have a double barrel thing of Earth is in imminent danger. It's like, it's right on Earth's doorstep. This is it. So that's already very pitched. And then you add in the element of, did Picard really deal with all this? And maybe it was, Borg is another episode where he did have an opportunity to deal with it. I think Family was, you're like, what was the point of that episode? I think it really actually was a pretty meaningful episode because it really cracked going back to a brother who was never impressed by him, like, so he already wasn't going into it where everyone was treating him like, oh, Captain Picard. And you can imagine that situation, that it might be hard for Starfleet therapists to kind of get in there and help him work through his issues. And also Starfleet Command has lost hundreds of great officers. So it's like, we need you out there, buddy. You can take a couple weeks off while the Enterprise is refit. Then you're back to being the captain of the flagship. And he's like, great, I can do it. So I think maybe there's extenuating circumstances. It's also network TV. We don't really go through that. So in the movie, watching that, you see the revenge. You trust that Patrick Stewart's going to give a performance. Then you have Lily there calling it out, right? Which I think really makes it work, is like Lily going like, but you said you're like this, and now you're acting like this.
She calls it out after Worf calls him on it. So Worf is like the
once she sees how he's treating everybody, I think is the other part of it. And talking to Worf, it's like, Worf's restraint is amazing. It's like Worf, that's the other thing. Worf is, as much as Lily makes the movie work, Worf is the MVP of the movie.
He really is. I kind of wish he would have swung at him. Like, it just, something about that moment just felt like it needed that. It needed like a hit for him to be like, how dare you? But
yeah, but it's so perfect because you have Beverly going, Jean-Luc, like you have, like, everyone's very aware that like, no, we are in a failure state right now. This is not good. So I think the movie earns what people on the, like, kind of looking at it from a bird's eye view might say, like, this isn't Picard, this isn't Star Trek. I think it did the work, and I'm a very big fan of Star Trek can be anything as long as you do the work. You set it up and you have payoffs and you make it feel it works for the story. Is it organic to the Picard? We know, questionable, but the circumstances kind of create a different situation.
Oh yeah, it's totally fine by me. It doesn't feel fake. Yeah, we're going to talk about Data in a second. And I also had this thought in watching it. I was like, is Guinan in this movie? I don't remember Guinan in this movie. And then I was like, no, Guinan's not. But also Guinan is kind of like I feel like she's like a secret weapon. Sometimes having her makes it too easy because she's like, oh, time travel. I don't know. Sometimes she's like she's almost like Captain Marvel, where it's like, okay, like, you know what I mean? Like, you could just blast everybody with like, it's like a little too much. So I actually am okay that Guinan was not in this movie, but I think, I love Guinan. So anywhere she is not a bad idea, but I think this had enough. I think she would have made things a little too easy, a little too smooth. She would have been there to help people through some of their issues. And I think it was nice to have all those tensions.
It's tough because Guinan really would have been on the ship. She would have been like picking up a phaser to take down the Borg. She would have been, and then it's like, it's not a two-hander. I mean, Lily is there, but it's not a Picard Lily story. And if you put Guinan in, it's not a Picard and Guinan facing off against the Borg Queen. But you can't imagine that Guinan would be like some sort of pacifist. She'd be like, this is it. I'm in Doomsday again. She wouldn't be like, turn the other cheek. She'd be like, this is the Borg. It's time to throw down.
She would be, to Nadia's point, pulling a Starship Mine, putting on a tank top, taking out that phaser rifle and being like, I've been waiting for this day. Like, let's go. She would have been right there in the front. Where do we need to go? Oh, they're in engineering. How do we blow up engineering?
Right. And it's like, we don't want to see Guinan die. We don't want to see her threatened. It's like, it's just,
she wouldn't die.
Yeah.
They
picked the right story. I mean, in the original drafts, it took them a while to land on it. But in the original drafts, it was Picard on the surface trying to convince Cochran to do his thing and Riker on the ship. Like, that's how, like, stuck in their own ways of writing TNG over the years that they had gotten, that they forgot, like, no, you got to put the star in the star part. And like, it took them a while to land on what they got. And it worked.
Guinan in the Janeway phaser rifle combo. Yep. Exactly.
A tank top and a hat. Yeah. And in the hat is grenades. Yeah, absolutely.
So, okay, so that's your thoughts. And let me know in the chat your thoughts as well about kind of Picard's character played in this movie. I agree with you, Brian, that this is not the Picard we normally see, but I feel like this is the most human version of Picard we ever see. He feels like a regular person in this movie. He doesn't feel, because a lot of times in the show, because he's such a great diplomat, he's like so level-headed during times where I'm like, I'd be freaking out, and he's just like, options. And it's like, we're about to blow up in like 30 seconds. And he's like, it's fine. okay, what should we do? You know what I mean? Like they're just all so neutral. And I like seeing him have emotions. And also to your point, the rest of the crew, we don't get a ton of them. They're there. You know, they have some glory shots where they're standing in the back like this.
That's right.
But yeah, we don't get to see a lot of them. But again, I don't actually miss it because of the way the storytelling is going. Like I don't feel like I'm missing anything. I feel like they're taking me along, they're keeping me really engaged, and there's no parts where I'm just like checking out and being like, what just happened? Or like, what are we doing? I mean, the Cochran parts, like I said, a few of them I was like, let's fast forward. But that wasn't because they were bad. That's just because like I wanted to keep going with the actiony parts. Had I seen this in the theater like you, I wouldn't have had a single complaint. Like, I really wouldn't have.
To me, it just feels like a side of Picard that we'd never seen before. Because, I don't know, there are times where he's more human. The Inner Light is not like one of my favorite episodes. But, for example, once he accepts that he's in this other life, he does admit, like, I never thought I'd want a family. And he's being very emotional. Darmok, he's very conflicted about what's going on, and once he understands what's going on, you see the vulnerability present. But this is sort of like a raw nerve. He's exposed, which we get a hint of at family, but because he's in the safety basically of his family, that it turns into crying and just kind of a release. And here that release is like he's in an imminent threat. So he's been exposed, but he can't like go away. He can only confront it. It's confronting him. So it's an interesting dramatic parallel. It is, to me, a situation we've never seen him in before. We've seen him be tortured. You know, he wasn't getting out of that situation, but he was also kind of like, I'm not going to let these Cardassians break me. You know what I mean? Like he's got that. Whereas with the Borg, it's like they already broke him. They know all of his secrets. They already know. And now it's like the future of Earth. You know, he's basically got the weight of the concept of Star Trek on his shoulders, right? He's like, I got to save the future.
The Federation, the planet, the world, everything. Yeah, me alone against my biggest mortal enemy. I feel like it was just kind of like a perfect storm because he would be the same way if any bad guy was trying to destroy the Federation but specifically the Borg. That's what clouded his judgment and turned him into Captain Ahab. Because now it's not tactical. Now it's like revenge.
That's right.
Like it was tactical, and then it like tipped over, and then it was like that's when he does his whole speech of like no further, blah, and then she's just like, okay,
no further, blah. Come on, Charisse.
I can't do it the way he does it. But you know what line?
I just our space and we fall back. Assimilate entire worlds and we fall back. Well, not again, not here, not here, not
Go for
again. The line was drawn here, this far, no further, and I will make them pay for what they've done. And I mean, come on. And the awkward throw of the phaser rifle through the mirror, not.
And it's followed by, you broke your little ships.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. I just love that. Ugh, I love it.
Great.
I love the ships too. They look so cool. Like, just even rewatching it, I was like, I want all of those. Like in the way they like spin. I don't know. It just looks so cool. Okay, so my question was about Picard, and yes, we had a lot in the comments about kind of where he is in his life. The whole thing with family is that was supposed to be just the very ending of Best of Both Worlds Part 2. So that was supposed to be like the last few minutes, but they couldn't fit it into Best of Both Worlds Part 2, so they made a whole episode about it, and I think maybe that's why that episode feels too long. However, you couldn't put that in Best of Both Worlds Part 2. Like there was no space for one more thing in that episode. Best of Both Worlds Part 1, though, had so much buildup because you had to get the backstory and you had to figure out Shelby and there was so much in that, which is, I think this is a Trek trope, is that Part 1 is always kind of like, whatever. And then Part 2 is either also whatever or very, very good. And like you need Part 1, but like it could probably be shortened. I think that's kind of what was going on here. Although I'm not complaining because I think Best of Both Worlds Part 2 is fantastic.
Also, Best of Both Worlds is a Riker story. That's the other part of it. Like the entire emotional arc is like, why is Riker being the second banana to Captain Picard? And it's like, because Captain Picard's amazing. Being on the Enterprise is cool. And that's where he lands on at the end, which, you know, it's probably not.
Yeah, somebody commented in one of my videos and they were like, Riker never even got promoted in 7 years or something like that. I was like, because he turned them down.
Yeah, they pulled the chair out for him 3 times in the first 3 seasons.
Yeah. I was like, didn't he even get an offer in season 1? Like he was always getting offers and he was like, I'm good. I'm good. Because I had made this video about how Harry Kim had never gotten promoted. And they were like, well, what about Riker? He didn't get promoted. I was like, that's different.
It's totally different. It's totally different.
Offered.
Yeah. Yep.
So yes, Randall asked in the chat, was this movie in 1995? Because Worf was not on DS9 yet. This movie came out in 1996. And it came out in the second season of Voyager, which would make it the third or fourth season of DS9, I think. So
well, it had to have been at least the fourth season of Deep Space Nine. That's when Worf was on the show of Deep Space Nine.
So I think the timing works. But even if it doesn't, it's so long ago. We're just going to say it works now.
It still works. Worf is on the Defiant at the start of the movie. The Defiant was in Deep Space Nine, so it all works. Adam Scott is also in there, by the way, which is always weird to think about.
I mean, the timing of Worf being on the Defiant like a year before he joins DS9, like if it was season
that doesn't
3,
work. Yeah,
then that doesn't work. But like, I actually don't know the dates of that. And then Windgrace says they had the gray uniforms, and he joined DS9 before that transition as well. Yeah, I don't know.
Now they hadn't switched in Deep Space Nine. They hadn't yet switched to the gray uniforms. So then when they first switch over, which I believe the episode's called Rapture, it's pretty funny to watch how they incorporated those new uniforms into the show, because some people are not wearing them and some people are, because they just imported the First Contact uniforms in to save money. And so some people were still wearing the old uniforms. And then this is the kicker. Avery Brooks, the star of your show, he's got his zipped all the way up so you can't see the red underneath. And then his comm badge is not in the black. It's up on the gray or the purple. It's actually more of a purple than a gray. And it's just funny watching that episode being like, they had not figured out that uniform yet, that costume. That's so like just seeing the comm badge up in the top area was so weird. It's like
this is stuff that only super fans can even recognize, right? Best of Trek, Worst of Trek says Riker isn't promoted for 15 years. It's insane how long it takes him. And even then, he still doesn't get the Enterprise that he was holding out for. Do you think that's why he stayed? Because he wanted the Enterprise? I think he stayed because he loves working with Picard more than
that's all. I mean, that's all the above, right? I think that's all the above. He wants the Enterprise, but he'll keep working with Picard as long as Picard's in command of the Enterprise. So really, it's just like Picard holding on for too long. Maybe if Captain Kirk hadn't told him to never give up his command, he might have moved on sooner.
Okay, so that brings us to PS2 Chipper is saying like the Defiant was introduced later on and Worf came season 4 episode 1. I don't remember. I mean, I wouldn't know anyways. All the timings.
Deep Space Nine introduced the Defiant in its season 3 premiere called The Search.
And in season 3?
Yes, and then season 4 was the introduction of Worf in The Way of the Warrior. So they had the Defiant a full year before they had Worf. Then okay. Worf comes aboard. Yeah. So
okay. So that makes sense. Yeah. Okay. Mr. Captain 93 says, but he has had a bunch of promotions in the first few years. I'm not sure which that one is referring to, but maybe still Riker because he got promoted quickly and then never again.
I believe Worf gets promoted. Worf gets promoted at the beginning of Generations, and then he switches to command. From security to command at the end of the season premiere of season 4, and then he has he commits a war crime basically, and Cisco's like, "You're never going to make captain," and then he's like, "I know," and then later on he gets married to Jadzia Dax. And he flubs a critical spy mission to make sure that she doesn't die. And then they're like, you're definitely never making captain. So then it was funny watching Star Trek Picard season 3, where it's like, when he was captain of the Enterprise. I'm like, okay, so you none of y'all watched Deep Space Nine. Fine. Okay. Fine. Whatever.
They also made Seven captain. And they were very clear on like, you didn't even go to the academy. Like, we're never going to promote you. You're also Borg.
There's a version where all this gets explained by future guy from Enterprise screwed all this up. So, where it all just gets explained by future guy did it. Yeah.
Chronotons. That's what we say. It's always the Chronotons. Yep. That's right. Okay, so let's changing gears a little bit. Let's talk about Cochran's story. Okay. Which, like I said, is the part I usually skip in the movie just because I'm so like obsessed with what's going on with Data and what's going on the ship. But I do like the Cochran story. I think it's just right. It's kind of like it's like lemon meringue pie. Cochran is like the meringue. It's just like what makes it work. And what I really like about Cochran is that he's such a regular dude. Like he's just such like I'm just trying to make some money. I'm just trying to live in this post World War III situation. And everybody from the Enterprise is like, wow, it's you, the Cochran. And he's like, like, I don't know. I love that reluctant hero thing of how he's like, is there any way I could run away? Is there any way I could hide? I just want to have a drink. All I wanted was some money. These weirdos are like weird. Like, I don't know. I really like how not into it he is. And even in the end, when they kind of convince him, he doesn't really come around because he wants to be some big hero, because he never did want to be some big hero, but he did follow through with what he committed to, even though he was totally hungover while doing it. So I appreciated that. But I want to know, what were your thoughts on this character, Brian? And also in the chat.
I think as a kid watching this, and I actually still feel this to this day, I'm always amazed by someone not wanting to be a part of Star Trek. Like, so someone just rejecting the premise that the future can be good and positive is always surprising to me. This is a great comment. Absolutely. James Cromwell is known for playing very human people, for sure. Even in his Succession role of this like do-gooder, but obviously who's made hundreds of millions of dollars by being the family member of this asshole. But anyway, it's like James Cromwell is portraying. He's not an audience surrogate. He is an archetype in his own way. He doesn't really get like an emotional journey. It's exactly what you said. It's like he doesn't land on it at the end of oh, this is cool. But I do think because at the end he's the first person to greet the Vulcans, there's a lot of accidental symbolism in there that capitalism drives us and it brings us into this amazing future. But on a character level, right? Yeah. But on a character level, it's interesting because he's told about how important it is. And even though he sees the Enterprise and all that stuff, it's not until like literally he says the line, he's like, they're from another world, right? I didn't watch the movie before we started streaming. I've just seen the movie that many times. Yeah.
Are you guys on some kind of Star Trek?
Sure. Yes. But he's so, it takes until the Vulcans are literally standing right in front of him to recognize the gravity of the situation he finds himself in, the weight of his accomplishment, which absent the crew being there probably would have happened, right? Because there would have been no attack by the Borg, all that stuff. So who knows?
But after the Borg being there, it would have still happened.
So to that point, it's sort of like, this is the Star Trek angle of like, people are inherently good. And even though they have their own issues that get in the way, it's kind of like a very Eastern religion, right? We create suffering in ourselves, that kind of thing. So it's kind of that approach of like, his desires are his obstacles. And once he recognizes that there is something way bigger than anything he could even imagine, it changes, it unlocks the humanity within him, which is a very classic Star Trek idea. I think it's an idea that did not survive to the 21st century, unfortunately, but it's here in this movie, and I think it works pretty nicely. It's like a good payoff, right? The whole time he's being told how important he is, and he has to actually experience it for himself to believe it. That's very good dramatization.
And even when he does experience it, first of all, he's just like in awe, right? When they land, he's like, what the? And the Picard's or Riker's like, they're going to want to meet the man who broke the warp barrier. That's you. And like pushes them out because he's just like everybody else just staring. And he goes out. But then after that, when they show like right before the end credits where he's like having a drink with them and playing his loud music and teaching them about dancing and stuff, it's like, that moment was big, but it didn't change him that much. Do you know what I mean? Like, he's still him. He's still drinking. He's still dancing. He's just doing it with the Vulcans. He's like really just bringing them into his world, and he's still doing his thing, which I like. Like, there was no suddenly he's a totally different human being or whatever. Right. And also, what's funny is like their concept of, I love this idea of people in the present or future looking back at the past and having all these preconceived notions of what these people were probably like, what they were thinking, what they were feeling, what their values were based off of who knows what, right? So in the beginning, when Picard and Data are like looking at the warp ship and they're just kind of like, seeing that it's all okay, Picard's like, Cochran has to be here. This is the most important thing in his life. He would never abandon this or whatever. And
That's
Cochran
right.
was like, screw that ship.
That's
Like,
right.
that was the first thing he said. He was like, I don't care about that. Not compared to my life. You know what I mean? And it's just like, where did Picard get this idea that this was Cochran's biggest value? Probably from stuff he read, but like that was not his biggest value. So how did that get into the stuff that he read and then become accepted as truth? I don't know. I just find that really fascinating.
It's is Abraham Lincoln as amazing? There's been so many books, literature that's tried to get at, is Abraham Lincoln as amazing as his acts, basically, that kind of thing. I think about that sometimes too. I'm like, well, George Washington couldn't have been that good of a guy, but I mean, you try to think about all these things. It's like Martin Luther King, though, he seems like he was pretty cool. So you never know.
You do have some stuff like sometimes you have, for people who are a little more closer to our time, we do have their surviving loved ones who can tell us what they were like. But the further back you go, and especially before there was like lots of writing and stuff like that, it just all becomes mythology.
Right.
And whoever is the victor gets to write the history. And of course, they're going to write themselves as amazing, or whoever is writing for them is going to write them as amazing.
And you can imagine an in-universe explanation being like, coming out of the post-atomic horror, we had, some people actually emerged, some good human beings. One of those was Ephraim Cochran, right? You know what I mean?
Yes.
You can imagine that it was very easy for them to paint him as this great guy,
this shining light in the darkness.
That's right.
Because that moment when the Vulcans came, it changed everyone's concept of their place in the world, in the galaxy, in the universe, right? It was like, oh, we're not the only ones. Oh my gosh, there's aliens. Oh my gosh, there's space travel. So that alone was like a huge pivot point for them to be like, oh, we don't need a World War IV because there's more bigger things out there. And this was the collapse of money and the collapse of like a bunch of things that we thought were important because we were the only ones. Now we know we're not the only ones. So now that's not important. So like the flight itself was very pivotal. And I could see all this other stuff being heaped on Cochran as a result. Like he was a visionary. He knew this would change the world. Like what they do at Steve Jobs, right? Where they were like, oh, he knew as a 10-year-old, he knew he was going to change the world. And you're like, how many 10-year-olds? He probably didn't. He really probably didn't, but they're just like, oh, and he had a dream one time and that was the vision. And you're like, okay, well, maybe, perhaps, which to your point of like, the desire causes the damage or whatever you just said, that
it's just Eastern philosophy that the source of our pain is in wanting. That's all.
That fits perfectly with tonight's theme. So let's take that to Data, right? Like his biggest desire is to become human. And the Borg Queen argues that humanity sucks. She's not wrong. But she thinks that the Borg are better. She's not right. Because she feels like the combination of technology and biology
and the
is
flesh,
really,
that's it.
Yeah, exactly. And so she feels like, and she's telling Data, like, you are imperfect for two reasons. He's imperfect because he does not have biological components to him. And he's imperfect because he is made in the likeness of humanity and aspires to be like humanity. And humanity is the worst or whatever. So she's trying to convince him, you do need to have flesh. That's true. But you don't need to have the same values as humans. You really should have the values of us, which is the irony of the Borg Queen, which is like going around and just like collecting all of this diversity into ourselves. Right. And she's like, and that's what perfection is. And Data's like, but you're not really like collecting diversity. You're assimilating. You're just like taking and like sticking it in with what you're doing. You're not you're erasing individuality. You're doing the opposite of that. And so let's talk a little bit about Data's like seduction of power, right? Because what he wants most, she can give him sort of. She can give him flesh. And she turned back on his emotions chip. So now he can have emotional feelings and physical feelings, tactile feelings he didn't have before. And he could also have power, which is a very human thing to want. So what did you think the first time you saw this movie, Brian? Did you think Data fell for it? Did you think he was really on the Borg Queen's side? Or did you know all along he was going to save the day?
No, I never bought that storyline. That was, even as a kid, I was like, this isn't quite working. I was kind of in the seduction because it's so weird. We're used to the Borg being faceless and a hive mind. And then we're told there's a queen.
They don't talk.
The queen is hot. The queen is sweaty and wet, and she has a very soft voice and
sultry,
sexy, sultry voice, nice lips. And then Data turns into a horny geek that's just like, "Ugh." Like there's no cool program in there. I mean, Dr. Soong could have given him anything, and he's like,
I
"Ugh."
mean, he
He
fights
turns
really well though.
yeah,
That's kind
turns
of hot.
into
I
Jerry
like when he
Lewis.
throws the Borg around
Yeah,
one-handed.
so
That's cool.
I think the transformation kind of makes like it all on paper it makes sense, but I never really bought it. There was never for me a convincing turn, and the story really is like Data's a prisoner. He gets kind of convinced. He kind of makes his escape. Then we don't see him, and then suddenly he's a bad guy, and it's kind of like, I'm not totally buying it. In terms of what Data wants, I mean, coming out of Generations, maybe that's the connective tissue. Was like he got his emotions chip. We see in the movie he can turn it off. It's like which almost defeats the purpose of it. But in any case,
That's
the
so
point
great.
is,
But it's
yeah,
Data. That's the great
yeah,
thing is that he can turn it off. Just like when he was dreaming and then he was having
right.
nightmares and they were like, stop dreaming. Which,
So
oh
in
my
an,
gosh, if I had that superpower, I had
right,
the worst nightmare last night and I often have nightmares. And I'm like, man, that would be great. Just to be like, oh, we're done with
yeah.
that. I would never turn it
So
on.
I think there was just something kind of missing about that because I never believe that Data is going to turn against his crewmates and help them out. And yeah, I don't know what that could have looked like to make it better or different. But actually, something you were saying reminded me that one thing we've always missed with the Borg is the mix. So we very rarely see the Borg like they just have one type of energy weapon. They kind of all act the same. We don't see them speak other languages. We don't see them
We
use
don't see
other
them speak at all,
tactics. We don't see the manifestation of that
really.
collective knowledge present itself in any way. That might have been fascinating to see some, the Borg Queen embodying the not the individuality, the hive mind in an even more hive-like way. But in terms of like Data's journey and his choices and being different, because it was all forced upon him. It's kind of like the
Mm.
Picard story without a kind of compelling emotional catharsis. It's not, Picard is pushed to the brink of his outburst, right? And Data doesn't really get that. And I think it's a little muddled because he wants to be human, but does that mean he wants to be flesh? Like that's not clear. She could have played
Yeah.
she could have just played his personal log or something. What was missing was just a moment because he is on his heels in that first scene when he first meets the Borg Queen, but so is the whole audience. We're like, what the hell is going on? This is not what we expected. But there's never a moment where she has him personally on his heels.
Mm.
Another version is like she just holds a gun to Spot's head. I don't know, but you know what I mean? Like there is like a little beat missing that gets us into
Oh,
how it becomes a personal story for Data. You have to
that was
know
it.
that,
Now I feel like it was a missed opportunity to just have the little cat and a little phaser and being like,
yeah,
give me the codes,
yeah.
Data.
We'll
Give me the
assimilate your
codes,
cat.
Data.
We put nanoprobes in his food dish.
I will assimilate
or
Spot
her.
right now.
Yeah, that's right.
And he/she will be a part of the collective forever.
Yes.
Yeah, that's pretty funny.
But Data's point is Data's point is what lays the whole thing kind of limp. It's not like a terrible sequence, or a series of scenes, but he's basically like, you're trying to honeypot me and so that I'll release the security codes and that's it. And so beyond that, yeah, it's like, well, we know what both sides stands on. So what's the drama here? And so I think it was missing some little other threat.
Yeah, when I first watched it, I for sure thought that Data had flipped at the end when he launched the torpedoes, when he unlocked the computer and launched the torpedoes. And I was like, what the heck, dude? Like, what just happened? And then when they missed, I was like, oh, okay. All right. Okay, good.
I think I was just attuned to Brent Spiner's acting at that point, and it's like, now you're evil, and it's like, okay, well, he's been pretty mustache twirling here, and I'm 16 or 15 at this time watching it, going like, you're not convincing me. So what am I supposed to feel? So
You know what? I was into it, especially when Picard was like, I remember you, which was a nice touch too by the writers to be like, oh yeah, she was there the whole time. We just didn't tell you before. I like that. But he was like, oh yes, I remember you. And you were there all the time. And he was like, you wanted me to come of my own accord. You wanted me to be an equal, all these things. And it was like, oh, okay. Like that makes sense why Picard was different and special because he wasn't the first Starfleet person they've assimilated. They've assimilated tons. It was like, okay. And then when she was like, Data's my equal, I was like, ooh, that's also like, I like that twist of being like, all right, you're right. I did want to equal, but I have one now. So I'm not getting back with you. That's kind of how I felt with that scene. And I was just like, oh, okay. So I was just so caught up in like, there was a thing between you two. There was supposed to be a thing between you two. Oh, but there's a thing between you two. And so I was really like, again, it was very much a pattern interrupt. And I was like, what is going on right now? And then the torpedoes, and I was like, come on, dude. And then they missed. And I was like, okay, good. So I wasn't even in the real world of looking at the acting and the storyline and what I know about Data. I was really stuck in like, who is this woman? This chick is like wild, you know? This character, I feel like, was such a genius move for the Borg, because it made them, I don't know, it gave them focus and it gave them more intentionality. And then it gave Voyager a whole 4 seasons of material to work on. So without it, what would we have done? We wouldn't have had 7 or anything to talk about.
I guess I try not to think about it too hard, because it kind of defeats the purpose of Locutus. If they want a voice to speak for them, why not just have the Borg Queen do it? Why not make a specialty drone? You know what I mean? Like, I try not to think about it too hard, but in terms of her wanting an equal, sure. But Data would have to have an ego, right? He'd have to have something like, if this was lore in the situation, that's like, well, shit, we can't let these two meet. Like, that's actually what
I was thinking. I was like, good thing this is Data and not lore, because Data was like, but loyalty, you know, like that was his whole thing, is like, I mean, I might go with this plan, except for you're trying to destroy Earth and like all my friends. You know, if this was some other scenario where it didn't involve destroying Earth and all his friends, he'd probably be like, okay, you know. But Laura, on the other hand, he would join because she wanted to destroy Earth and all Data's friends. That would be like,
I've already told the Borg what to do. I already got some of you guys. Yeah.
He'd be like,
I need to answer Robert's question. Yeah, you know, a Borg cube smells crazy in there. You know it does.
With all the decaying flesh. I don't know. It seems like it's very sterile. So
in
maybe
both, when they first introduced them in Q-Who, and then in Best of Both Worlds, and then here in First Contact, you know, Picard tells you the temperature of a Borg cube, and it's muggy in there.
Yeah.
So it's just basic. It's got to smell like a gamer's chair in there, is my thought about a Borg cube. So.
But why is it muggy? If part of them is cybernetic, if you've ever been in a room with lots of computers, it's icy cold. So like,
but there's also people. Muggy? There's also flesh in there as well.
Yes, but it's muggy for flesh, because remember in the Enterprise in First Contact, they were like, why is it so hot? Oh, why is it? Right. So it was like uncomfortable for fully biological beings. So it was
I like the idea that, I like that, Nadia, that Borg cube is basically like space Florida. That actually kind of tracks pretty well with their behavior too. So they do eat faces.
No offense, Floridians, or maybe all the offense, but I like Florida. I don't think it smells like a Borg cube from the few times I've been there, but I haven't been everywhere. So okay, that takes us to.
They do have green energy weapons. Florida is like kind of weirdly green in a lot of places. I think this is a pretty good theory, actually.
Nadia says she grew up in Florida, so she's allowed to say that. Okay, well, you would know better than me. I grew up in California, so I have no idea. They don't have topical cream for their dry skin, so they keep the humidity on.
As the doctor says, the Borg, they cause skin irritation, the implants. We've got, folks, we've cornered this. We've figured this out.
This is so weird. This is like the weirdest tangent we've been on so far. Okay, so I did want to talk about the Borg Queen, but I'm just realizing, Brian, I never told you how long this conversation was going to be. So you might have assumed it was an hour. And if that is the case, we're over time. So I can wrap it up here so that way you can get back to your.
I had my calendar set for 90 minutes. I was expecting a 90-minute conversation.
Oh, perfect. Okay. In that case, we're going to keep talking. And then your sick cat will have to wait a few more minutes.
That's right.
So I did want to touch on the character of the Borg Queen. So we've been talking about kind of like the future you're creating, right? So Picard was finally dealing with this trauma from the past and revenge versus kind of the greater good, right? Where he said, okay, forget the hand-to-hand. That was kind of stupid. Everybody go to escape pods and we're just going to blow the ship up. That's probably a better call. Okay, so he did the right thing. Data was like, I do want to be human. And this actually makes sense to me that he didn't fall for the Borg Queen's shenanigans, because he didn't fall for Q's shenanigans either, right? Because Q was
Right.
like, I could just make you human, although I would never do that to you because that would be horrible to do to anyone, right?
Right.
And but then he could have, and at the end, Data was like, don't you do it, don't you do it, and so he just gave him a big belly laugh instead of making him human. But he could have done that. And Data's always been very clear that he wants to become human through effort. Like he wants
Yes.
to evolve and mature and grow and learn and discover life through this process. It's not that he wants to be human, it's that he wants to experience the process of becoming human.
That's
So it
right.
kind of makes sense that he wouldn't go for any easy button. Then we have Cochran, who is just being Cochran, he's just being himself. And he has no idea that what he's doing is going to change the entire future forever.
He's not
Which I feel
concerned
like
with that either.
No, I mean, no. And I also feel like most people who change the future forever aren't concerned with that. They're like so focused on the thing they're doing, and it just so happens to be the missing puzzle piece to something really grand, right? But most of the time, people are just very like obsessively focused on their area of expertise. And they're not necessarily trying to change the world. And I can say this with a background in science is that the scientists who are trying really hard to win the Nobel Prize don't often win it. But the ones who win it are the ones who are just obsessed about their craft. And they end up winning it because they're like the most expert of everyone. And they're so into it, right? So that kind of tracks for me that he does this really life-changing thing, world-changing thing by accident, right? But then we have the Borg Queen, and she has a very consistent goal as well, which is universal domination, right? Like she just wants to rule everything. But what's interesting, and I didn't really see it until I was watching this movie and teased it apart with Data talking to the Queen, is that her whole thing is like, she's saying, I want order and perfection, unity, right? And what she really wants is like connection. She wants everybody to be one. She wants connection.
Sure.
But in order to get that connection, she is forcing everybody into this assimilation in such a way that it's leaving her completely isolated. Because there's only one queen. And her whole thing of I want a counterpart is because there's only one queen. So yes, she has many,
Yeah.
and she has a whole, army of nameless, faceless drones, but she still wants more. None of that is satisfying, right? None of that is filling whatever void she's claiming that she's filling through her actions. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's the struggle of existence is where we are always trying to reduce uncertainty in our lives. So we have anxiety, which is fear of the future and not knowing things, but we also, you see this in military maneuvers or people who take extreme measures, standing up for what they believe in, whatever it is, of how can we eliminate threats so that I can feel more secure in my life. And sometimes that manifests in reaching out and how can I make the community around me better so that people's lives are better, so that them becoming threatening to my life, those odds diminish. But most of the time it presents as some sort of show of force, that it's like we must destroy, conquer, reformat, whatever it is. It needs to conform to what I need or want. And that's the pattern she's locked in. She's locked into all the way to Star Trek Picard season 3. It just so happens that it syncs up perfectly with arch
Where they
villain.
blow up the Borg cube again.
That's right. She's been blown up so many times, but it's, what does she want is, it's never really examined. Like the Borg just get, and that's how Q introduces them. You can't negotiate with them. They're implacable. They're computer program, basically, that's locked in on one thing. So you can't change its mind, and you can't change her mind, and you can't have a conversation with her, which is why Data's, all that dialogue, when it's fun, that's when it's good. But when he's just kind of talking about like general Star Trek pablum with her, it's not interesting. Like that is the least, like to me, it's interesting when LaForge is trying to convince, I went to Zephyr Cochran High School. Like that to me is an interesting moment. That's like trying to appeal to him in so many ways. But the Borg, we know where they stand. And she doesn't say anything that's surprising or interesting. It's kind of presented in a new way. And I think you're right. It's just like she wants one thing that doesn't change, and it's inexplicable because why does she keep doing this? The Borg's plan is to travel back in time because human beings have annoyed the crud out of them, and they just wanted to stop. They want to conquer Earth in the past. Okay. They want to conquer Earth in the past because they're sick of human beings. And it's kind of like, okay, well, But in Voyager, it seems pretty clear like they've got a lot of the Delta Quadrant kind of chunked out, like it's kind of their own thing. So I don't know. I don't understand what perfection means. You know what I mean? Like I don't understand what that means. We don't see any examples of that. Why it always has to manifest in the way that it just. There's kind of a lack of imagination when it comes to the Borg, both in how they're dramatized and then as we see them. It's pretty boring when a group just wants to like wipe everybody out. It's kind of.
But they look so good doing it. This is one of
She
my
does.
favorite,
Alice Krige does for sure. Yeah.
This is one of my favorite alien looks, actually, is the Borg, because while it is kind of like everything in my shoebox just thrown on, it looks. I mean, the way they do it with the pipes and it's just steampunk heaven.
Shoebox.
A lot of dangerous things.
A lot of HR Giger inspired design.
Lots of pipes, lots of gears, lots of fake eyes. The usual. What's in everybody's shoebox. But I really love what they've created here, and I think because the look is so much that it's a nice juxtaposition that the characters are so little. Right? That they don't do anything. So you can just be like, wow, look, oh, they're gone. Ooh, look at it. Oh, no, he's gone. Ooh, look at that arm. Oh, there the arm goes. It's just like, and I feel like that's the Borg. Like there was a lot of, every time they showed them, they kind of added more to their backstory. And there's still a lot we don't know. And I like that. I like that they left mystery, because I feel like the more they tell me, the less I like it. Like in Picard, when they're like, oh, the queen is really like this. And I don't know. There's parts where I'm just like, just leave it a mystery.
Yeah,
some things are better as a mystery.
Yeah, that's the thing with every time you go back to this seemingly unstoppable force, they actually become, every time you stop them, they are no longer unstoppable. Like every subsequent time that they have defeated the Borg, they are defeatable. So now, just because it gets harder doesn't change the fact that they're scary. Yes. That's why, like, Infinity War with Thanos, it's like Thanos is unstoppable, and they have to literally travel back in time to stop him. Like that is how unstoppable he is. So there's something to that does get diminished, and I think that was all baked into some Star Trek fans at the time. The criticism of First Contact. Well, you're already kind of removing the uniqueness of the Borg by giving them a queen, but it's like it's math. Oh, they've got a hive mind. And beehives have queens, and it's like, okay, but that's not kind of what the concept was. So, and like,
but I like it so much more because I like it.
Well, sure, but I'm just saying, like, you could see once they start changing what it is, it changes what it is, and so the Borg Queen is less interesting than the concept of thousands of voices working in unison. Those desires of thousands of voices is inherently different than a queen, like that, and all they're doing is giving her what a queen wants. Like in any time period in history, conquest, devotion, and that she's the special woman above all. Like these are pretty basic queen things throughout history. There's nothing unique or alien about it, but it is presented as alien for sure, which we're talking about. She looks like Sharice's shoebox. Whatever's in there.
or like Windgrace's shoebox, which apparently is just like mine.
Oh, see, I thought you were saying shoebox. You're saying showbox. Okay, yes, all right.
No, I was saying shoebox. That's what I was saying. See, Windgrace said yes, shoe. Yes, we were saying shoebox.
I thought showbox was like an actual term of art regarding like.
No, not at all. Like where I keep shoes. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, and here's the other thing with the Borg Queen that got weird is we got so many queens, and that just that so confuses me because I'm like, she died in First Contact, then she's back in Voyager.
Well, then she died in the best of both worlds, they said, right? Right.
Then she dies in Voyager. Like,
so that's what I mean. Sure. Once you start once you start explaining a mystery, it's no longer mysterious. So
yeah, yeah. I do really. I think this is one of my favorite bad guys is the Borg Queen. I really like her, and the Borg Queen specifically in this movie, because the Borg Queen, every time she shows up in Voyager, you're kind of like, meh, you're kind of like, what? I don't know. It's to your point. It's less amazing because she's always defeated every single time. It takes a little while, there's some effort, but and the crew's always really scared, but it's not like the same as this. Like this whole movie, you're just like, I mean, they're just assimilating crew left and right, and I mean, pulling them down and just, I mean, it's crazy. Like,
So I have a backward point actually. So just to like, yes, we all agree the Borg Queen is great, and obviously there are people, Star Trek fans, who don't because they think it diminishes the idea of the Borg, but they do acknowledge. I think a lot of those fans acknowledge that Star Trek First Contact is still pretty good. Anyway, my point is, you can see the concept of the Borg is so great, and why the Queen is less great, because in Scorpion, Janeway negotiating against a faceless entity of unknowable needs is so much more threatening than if Janeway had been standing on that catwalk and the Borg Queen appears. It is inherently trickier. And like, she and Chakotay are not talking about the Queen, they're talking about the collective. The Borg are a threat. We do not know what they want. They see so many permutations. How can we negotiate with the species, which is what that is? That is so much more threatening than when we get the Borg Queen, because all we have to do is open up a can of whoop ass, literally, and she'll melt. Like, that's literally how you get rid of the Borg Queen. But if the Borg exist in every other drone you see, or just a computer screen, then that's much more terrifying. But I think also just turning her into a humanoid, turning the Borg as represented by one person, it just brings them down to the level of a person. And then we're dealing with their petty needs. We're assuming those things, right? We're assuming those emotions. So anyway.
yeah, well, I don't know how you say her last name. Alice, is it Krieg?
Kriega, I believe.
Kriega?
Yeah.
It's phenomenal. Oh my
It's
goodness.
great.
Yes, I totally agree with Best of Trek, Worst of Trek. She is the best Queen. And I think the movie works so well because of her. Like,
absolutely. I gotta say, Anne Hershing, who appears as her in Star Trek Picard season 2, which is a dreadful season of television. We killed all 10 episodes. Nevertheless, the campiness that they threatened to do with the Borg Queen, they did a lot of campiness with the Borg Queen. I did appreciate her performance better than I did Susanna Thompson, I think, in Voyagers.
I agree. I felt the same way. I was like, it's not as good as Alice Kriege, because she was phenomenal, but it did feel way better. Like, it felt good. It just wasn't like spectacular, but it was good. It wasn't bad.
Well, and also what the Borg Queen was doing. Yeah. There's a moment where they threatened she needed legs, and then the security guard goes on the ship, and it's like, it would be really cool if she kills that guard and takes his legs, and she's half Borg Queen and then half security guard legs. Please do that. This show needs it.
From the ceiling into the legs.
That's right. That's right. Yes. That's what was missing. The show was like threatening camp so much. I'm like, you have to go all the way. Please go all the way. And then they didn't. Anyway.
Oh my gosh, that would have been hilarious. Yeah. It would have just made me more furious, I think. But honestly, I was like such an anti-fan at that point that there was nothing they could have done that would have made me happy. Whatever they did, I would have complained about it, because I was already like episode 3 into it. I was like, we've gone back to 2024. I'm out. Like, I was already like mad. So whatever they did from that point, I would have just been mad. So
thank you, Best of Trek, Worst of Trek. It is Annie Hershing. I apologize. Rest in peace. I want to call it out because it was very shocking, her death. But and also it's just like, she was not the problem with that season at all. And putting the Borg Queen in the show was also an unwise decision. But sometimes actors can take what they're given and make something of it. And I'm like, she was good. I thought, I really enjoyed that performance. Did not like the role, did not like the story, but since First Contact, that was the first time where I was like, well, this is an interesting Borg Queen.
We have this running commentary on Durst's face, the guy who gets his face cut off by the Vidians.
Sure.
For some reason, this character comes up in every live stream. For some reason, we have to mention that character, which I'm trying so hard to forget. PS2 Chipper says,
I liked our episode on Phage, though, where we were both like, the Vidians, they're pretty.
Yeah, I like the episode Phage. I think that's a good episode, and I think the Vidians are terrifying. But the The
That was
episode where
also the episode where Janeway was like, "If you ever come near me and mine again, I will kill you, motherfucker."
Yes, yes, and it was the one where she was in the transporter room, like, fussing at them, and she
That's
was
right.
doing that, like, thing that she does that Kate Mulgrew does so well, where she's, like, having all this emotion with, like, very few words, and she's
She's
just like
choking down her Irish rage. Yes.
yeah, she's like, "If I see you, tell your people I will respond with the greatest amount," and you're just like,
Yeah.
"Y'all gonna get blown up. Do not
Yeah.
mess with Janeway. She will blow you up." Yes, that was a great episode. That was a great review. Um, let's see. Best of Trek, Worst of Trek says, yes, which I was gonna say, Dustin actually likes season 2. Oh, loved. I didn't know you loved. I thought you liked, but you love season 2 of Picard. It had problems, but getting more backstory about why Picard is the way he is was great. Yeah, and that bothered me too. Well, you know what? Like I said,
I'm
I was
glad people enjoyed it. I don't know how, but I'm glad some people did. I mean, we try to do on Trek Mary Kill. I'm not a believer in death of the author, especially for TV. Like they'll tell you that people are more than happy to get on a podcast or give an interview where they tell you why they did what they did. And I think we have a responsibility to read that stuff if we're that interested and understand why they make the story decisions that they did. And to me, Star Trek Picard season 2 seemed like a very good example of people saying they were Star Trek fans and proving that they never really watched the show, because there's nothing in the text of The Next Generation to indicate the backstory that they gave Picard, and instead forcing their own writerly picadillos into the character or crutches. And they did in season 1 as well. And Kristen and I did a review of Star Trek Picard season 1. I'm a California taxpayer. I don't know if Best of Trek, Worst of Trek lives in California, but we paid for that show. So I feel like we get to be extra harsh on it. I don't know if I want my money back, but I feel like we deserve a good story well told, and I don't think we got that in the first 2 seasons. And I think season 3 is quite open for interpretation as well. There are high points in season 3 for sure, but I don't know. I'm glad someone enjoyed it though. I have to be honest. I'm glad when people like Star Trek that I don't, because I honestly sometimes dislike some of the stuff so much that I wonder who is this for and who could possibly like it. Because I'm not someone that sees Star Trek on something and automatically goes 5 stars, baby. I treat it like I treat anything else. I watch it, and if I enjoy it, I enjoy it. If I don't know.
Right. I agree. And I think, season 1 of Picard had ups and downs. And of course, we're talking about First Contact, not Picard, but Picard's in First Contact. It all comes around.
It all works,
and it had highs and lows, but I really enjoyed it. I loved seeing so many Easter eggs were really fun, and just, the new technology and the visuals and just the story they were telling, and what's going on with the Borg. Like there was a lot of things that I found that were interesting. But it was definitely all over the place from a story perspective, but just from like a sit down and eat popcorn and watch it, I was like, okay, cool. And then I would have to say 2 actually had a through line. Like there was a story being told. I just didn't like it. I didn't like the story being told, but it was a cohesive story. So I do have to give them that. And the same for season 3. They actually were trying to like go from point A to point B over the span of the episodes. But I will say to Brian's point of, I agree. I love the fact that you loved it, Dustin, because I had the same exact feeling about Section 31, which Brian and I talked about before the show came out, or before the movie came out, where Brian was like, I'm pretty sure I'm not going to like this movie. And I was like, I'm pretty sure I'm going to love it for all the same reasons. Like all the reasons you're going to hate it are all the reasons I'm going to love it. And I was wrong. I very much did not love that movie on like all the levels. However, I know they put a ton of time, effort, and energy into shooting that movie. And while I think a lot of fans probably also didn't love it like me, there are people who I know, because they message me on my videos, who say, I love that movie. I really enjoyed it. And I'm like, I'm so glad, because I really feel like kindred with them. I actually had the same exact experience about Nemesis, which I think is a terrible movie. I had the same like feeling where it was like, man, so much effort, time, energy, CGI, like all of this to make something, and you put it out there, you think people are going to go crazy for it, and they're like, this is terrible. And you're just like, oh man, like a swing and a miss. And I love that there are people who are like, I see you, dude. And I love that, because they put the effort in. Somebody should love this. It's not me, but I'm glad somebody does. So I agree. Best of Trek, Worst of Trek. I'm glad you like season 2. I'm glad for all the people who love it. I'm glad for everybody who watched Picard, because that rebooted the whole franchise. And without that, we wouldn't have gotten Lower Decks and Prodigy and Strange New Worlds and Discovery. And so many fans I have met, this is how they first were introduced to Star Trek. Their very first introduction was Prodigy or Lower Decks or Strange New Worlds. They had never seen it before. So without Picard, we wouldn't have that. So
And
I feel
obviously, a
like I
lot of
can't
people
really.
saw First Contact who had never seen Star Trek before, and this movie did have a bit of a crossover appeal. And I think we should go back to First Contact. It piggybacks on your point pretty well. This wasn't quite a franchise saver, but if you consider that the 90s Star Trek had its pop culture resurgence and peak, this was another way that it extended it out at least a couple more years. And I think it all ended quite abruptly with Insurrection. But the point is that they were able to surf on goodwill. Everyone was playing at their best, trying very hard. You have to consider that like Generations was written by two writers who were also writing the finale. That's a tired script, had a lot of weird studio demands. They were still using the old sets. This was like a clean break. And like I said, a lot of the characters still do fall into caricature, but you can also see that they were so excited to try something slightly new with the stuff they'd been doing. There's an old trope in TV writing where you're pitching a show, and what audiences want is 90% familiar, 10% different. And it's
Same
weird
thing
to
with
think.
music. Go figure.
I'm not criticizing that. I'm saying, what is the value that what's the 10% that's different? That's what drives me nuts about a lot of the new Star Trek shows is like, I don't see 10% different. I see 98% familiar. And so that's where it gets tricky. And this, First Contact, I think is like, it spins the Borg, right? So there's something different. The visuals, that looks different. Picard playing a different emotion. Also just the heightening. This is something you couldn't do at the time as a TV episode. And we're still talking about it.
We get old-timey Earth, but we don't have to see San Francisco. We don't have to see the Santa Monica Pier.
Yep.
No one has to go to New York City or Roswell. It's just the middle of some woods, because that's not the point.
And they just touch on it. I think if this movie was made a little later or even today, they would kind of wallow in the misery of the post-atomic horror. They make a bigger deal of it. Here it's just kind of like they roll up on Earth. They're like, hey, oh yeah, look, based on the nuclear activity in the air, we're rolling up after the Third World War. and
they just had a war.
That's right. Yeah. So it gave you the Star Trek way into a story, and it was also just a lot of fun. That the deflector dish sequence, again, pristine memory. The whole audience was holding their breath. That sequence, if you take the movie out of it, is boring. They're walking slowly. It is Jonathan Frakes, a television director, jumping in, and because he knows this cast, he knows the vibe. It just worked. It was like alchemy. Anytime you make anything, it's alchemy. Section 31, Discovery, like all these shows, it's an alchemy. You can't recreate, which is why when they try to do these remakes, right, bring back the X-Files or all that, whatever, like it's fun, but it's like they were all made. They all are the result of the time they were made in, and it's very hard to recapture that. And so, First Contact was able to recapture the spirit of that, and that was pretty cool.
Yeah, you know what? You're right. Because I'm thinking about when they rebooted Arrested Development to like,
you can't
tell everybody that Netflix now has Netflix originals. That was their very first one to be like, hey, we have, and they called it a Netflix semi-original because it wasn't originally on Netflix. But anyways, they were like, we're going to start doing our own programming, starting with this. And it was fun to see the show again. And the magic that they had like was kind of gone. It's not about anybody's fault. It's just like there was a magical moment happening. And then that moment was over. It's like you turn the page. And now that page has been turned. And I think you're right. Like First Contact does still have a lot of the nostalgia and the nostalgia and the fun of TNG, but it also is a movie. Like, so the emotions are like ratcheted way up that we would never see in an episode. We've got yelling, screaming, breaking things, shooting people and cutting them open. We've got breaking necks and tossing. We've got like way more stuff. The stakes are way higher. I mean, a lot of times on TNG, there is a planet about to die. So maybe the stakes aren't that much higher, but now it's like the history of the Federation. So maybe that like adds a little bit, but I mean, I agree with you that it's like the 90% that we love, but it's got that 10% where you're like, ooh, but it's different, and it's bringing me back to something that is really exciting and fun. And I'm sure it was lovely to see the crew again after not seeing them for a little while. Wingray says the only thing he won't forgive are the very short treks, but I did watch that one Calypso. I liked it. So
that's a short trek. I believe they're talking about the very short treks, which came out last year, to honor the 50th anniversary of the
there's more
animated
short treks.
shows. They were little animated shorts. They were done. They're not considered canon, and I don't think people enjoyed most of them. They're done in like the Filmation style. Some of them were done in the Filmation style.
Oh, interesting. Okay, well then I take that back. Whatever I just said. Maybe I won't like. Okay, short treks are good. Very short treks are not good. Okay, thanks for that. Is that clarification? Yes, I agree. I did freak out about that last night when rewatching this movie, that the Doctor and Neelix are both in this movie, and I totally freaked out because, like, yeah, Ethan Phillips has such a unique voice that, hearing him anywhere, I'm like, that's Neelix. Where's Neelix? And that was just really fun. And I agree, seeing the Enterprise E was really, really cool.
So cool.
So cool. Short Trek's good. You guys are hilarious. Very Short Trek's bad. Okay, got it. So I want to say thank you so much, Bryan, for coming and having this conversation about this really epic movie. And this is one of the things I love about Bryan, because of your writing background and stuff, is that your takes are so different from mine because you have a perspective that's so different from mine. I'm just a fan, right? Like, I don't have any skin in the game here other than I like this stuff. But you have this unique perspective of what was maybe going on in the minds of some of the people creating these shows that could have led to these decisions that make me go like, oh, that makes sense. In fact, I was on another podcast and we were talking about Nemesis. And one of the I was on the STT&G's podcast, and one of those guys used to be an animator, and he was like, well, just so you know, behind the scenes, there'll be an idea for a movie, and then this whole other group will come in and they'll be like, but we need merchandise. And so they'll be like, okay, well, we need like the little scooter for merchandise and this and this and that. So they're like, okay, you got to put that in the movie so that we have merchandise. And so now that changes the script a little bit, and it changes the script a little bit. And then at the end, you come out with something that's very commercial, but maybe not very good. And I was like, oh, like, it's just nice to have those other viewpoints that explain that could explain how things ended up the way that they ended up. But if people want more of you, where can they find you?
Trek, Marry, Kill is our podcast. We're going to have new episodes running through June. Every month we do a monthly animated spotlight too. So if you just want to hear about Lower Decks, let's say, we try to arrive at objective conclusions. Treks, Marries, or Kills. You can also go to trekmarrykillpod.com to see all of our standings, how many Treks and Kills and Marries we've given out. Trek, Marry, K-Pod on social media.
And you can find, if you want to just listen to their podcast, the link is in the description below. So you can click there and go check out any or all of the episodes. They're all super fun. It's like all the Treks. It's not like the TNG podcast, which was just TNG. Trek, Marry, Kill is like all the stuff. And the cartoons and all the things. Charisse
is in it a lot too. So she's basically another co-host, and it was great having her on this season, and hope to have her back.
Yes, I would love that. Well, thank you everyone for coming. Thank you for everyone who's watching on the replay, and I will see you next week.